Hi, everybody. This is Helena Hart. Welcome to the Master Your Magnetism podcast. I'm here with my husband, Tom, today because we've been receiving a lot of questions on this topic lately, and I really wanted to get a man's perspective on this. So welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
By the way, we're recording this as a video for YouTube as well. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else and you'd like to see a video of this episode, that will be the first link in the description or episode details. You'll see that I am 9 months pregnant now. Our baby's going to be here in just a couple of weeks. We're so excited. And today we wanted to talk about how to talk to a man or bring up the conversation about what you're looking for ultimately in a relationship. So like I mentioned, we've been receiving a lot of questions lately from women who want to know how to bring up the fact that they're looking for a serious long-term relationship or maybe even marriage or settling down and starting a family one day. And I totally understand feeling anxious around how to bring that up with a guy you're dating, or perhaps you've been in a relationship with a man for a long time and you're not sure whether or not the two of you are on the same page. So how would you like to start here today? You think it would be helpful to share our own experience?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because I know when we had this conversation early on in our relationship, I felt like the way in which you went about it and what you said was just so perfect that there's information here that others could probably benefit from. And we didn't necessarily remember every single thing about this conversation. We don't actually remember word for word every element, but there are some aspects of it that I remember at least very clearly. And I think, you remember a few quotes that are really important. And I think those are important because of the way that you went about it. Those are things that stand out to us even to this day that made this conversation probably a lot easier and less of a big deal than maybe it would be for some other people. And I think we should also preface it by saying that, as some people know, we met each other online, and in our online dating profiles, we had slightly different things in the category of what are we looking for in a relationship. In fact, on my profile, I said, not sure yet, I think, and yours said that you were looking for a relationship. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So how we ended up from that point to having this conversation, I think probably about 6 weeks into our relationship, is sort of instructive because it shows how I think we started to realize early on that we were compatible and that there was some direction to our relationship, and that this was sort of a natural progression to have this at the time that we had it. And I think, though I had asked you, I think on our second date, what you were looking for, and you gave me some information, this conversation happened some weeks later. But even on that second date, I recall you saying something along the lines of you would like to find, or you thought it would be nice to find a person to have a long-term committed relationship with, but you also enjoyed being single and you weren't interested so much in getting into a relationship that you would settle. Isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly. I believe I conveyed at the time that, of course, I would love to meet the right person who I had a really strong connection with and settle down and have a life together, but I wasn't so dead set on getting married as like the goal in my mind that I was willing to settle for just anybody. I think it was something like that, right? So we'll share exactly what I said a few weeks later in that conversation that was kind of the turning point in our relationship where things started to get more serious. But before I do that, I think it's important to share some points on the energy of where you should be coming from when you have this conversation. Because the truth is, we could probably give you the perfect thing to say in any given situation with a man, but if you're not coming from the right place, it's not going to be received very well, and you could end up actually pushing him away, don't you think?
Right, yeah.
So we came up with 5 key points that we think are really important when it comes to the energy behind where you're coming from when you're having this conversation with a man. First, I think it's really important to trust that you can absolutely have what you want. So if you have a desire for an amazing relationship or to settle down and get married or start a family one day, you have to come from the place of trusting that that is absolutely possible for you. You don't want to be coming from a place where you're sort of looking to this man as holding something that you want, that you really want him to give you, like he's holding the key to your happiness, right?
Right.
The second point we wanted to share when it comes to your energy around this conversation is the fact that this isn't a big deal. You absolutely have a right to know where you stand and where things are going if you're investing time and energy into this potential relationship. The third thing you want to keep in mind is that you want to come from a place of openness and curiosity where you're not attached to the specific outcome of this one particular conversation or interaction with this one specific guy. I talk about this all the time. You don't want to make one specific man or the commitment you want from him the goal or the prize in your mind, because that can come across as pressure to a man, and that will actually decrease his desire to want to come closer and commit to a real relationship often. The next point that we wanted to share is that you don't want to come from a place of urgency or needing to know all the answers right now. A good place to come from is, this is something you might want to know about me. I'm sharing this with you because I want to have a deep, connected relationship. I don't want to have a superficial relationship where we're just skimming the surface. So that's your reasoning for wanting to share this. You're sharing this because you want a deep relationship, and this is something that this man might not know about you. You're not sharing it because you're trying to get him to step up and make some kind of commitment or decision right now. And the last thing we wanted to share here is that it's important to be willing to walk away if this man or the relationship is not in alignment with what you truly want and deserve for yourself. Basically, you have to be okay with the wrong men fading away if they don't want what you want. You want to put your desire for a great committed relationship ahead or above your desire to just be with this one man right now, and you'll sort of take him however you can get him, right?
Right.
So do you want to share what we talked about in that conversation a few weeks later where we actually brought this up?
Yeah, I think what I recall specifically you stating was, what I don't want is for another year to go by and for us to still not be sure whether we're on the same path or not. And whether the year time frame was set in stone or not, I think what I took from that was that you at least had some concept that you did not want to just date endlessly. You wanted to date with some intention of moving into a long-term committed relationship, and that if I wasn't on the same page with you, that you wanted me to let you know that as soon as possible. And I think I stated then something about, I don't think it'll take another year. I think we'll probably know within a few more months, right? Is that what you recall?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not like I knew he was the one 6 weeks in and I was trying to get him to make some decision. We were still getting to know each other. So it's not like I knew exactly how I wanted things to unfold in my mind. I had no idea that we'd be married a year later, right? But I knew that I didn't want to just kind of date forever and then have a year go by and realize that we're not on the same page in terms of what we ultimately wanted, right?
Right.
So I think sharing what you don't want can actually be really powerful in a situation like this. If you're coming at a man all of a sudden telling him all these things that you want, I think that could come across as pressure to him. Of course, there's a time to do that. We'd only known each other 6 weeks at that time, so I really didn't know exactly what I wanted or what I saw for us. Like I said, we were still getting to know each other, but I knew for sure that I didn't want to just date anyone endlessly, because I knew that if I met someone who I believed was the right person for me, I did want that chance to potentially get married and start a family. And by the way, I was 37 and a half years old when I went online and when we first met. I forgot to mention that at the beginning.
Yeah, I think that the other key element, aside from the energy with which you were coming into that conversation, was the request was reasonable. I think that that is another really key element to what you were requesting. I realized that you were not trying to get me to step up, or you were not trying to give me an ultimatum or a timeline or something. You were merely making what was a reasonable and objectively reasonable request, that if I didn't see myself and us on a path to a long-term relationship, that I let you know that as soon as possible so that I wasn't wasting your time. And I think I had developed a respect for you early on in our relationship because of the way that you did approach everything, and you were reasonable. And I think that it would have been unfair of me. I felt like it would have been unfair if a year had gone by and I had basically wasted that time of yours and then suddenly figured out that I wasn't really on the same page. And so that kind of put into the back of my mind just this thought that I should be trying to figure out whether or not I am ready for that in this relationship, basically, for this to become a long-term committed relationship. The point still is that with anyone at any age, it's only fair to that person, if she or he does not want their time to be wasted, that the other person respect that and be able to figure out quickly and move on or not. And I knew that if I wasn't on the same page, I would have let you go, because I wouldn't have wanted another year to go by and to have wasted your time. And I think what specific question that kind of put into my mind was, if not now, why? And I think that's important, because I think for a lot of men will make a lot of excuses essentially around why they're not ready now for a relationship. They're not ready now because some element of their life isn't quite in order yet, or they haven't quite built their career, or they have some other family issues or whatever, something that is inhibiting their ability to right now focus on a relationship. And I think with the right person, none of those things are true factors. The right person will motivate any man to essentially figure it out as quickly as possible, because he won't want to let that go by. And I think with you, I realized that you valued yourself and you weren't going to just wait around endlessly. I knew that you were not, at least at that point in our relationship, you were not that invested to where you couldn't have moved on. And so I realized that, as I was thinking about our relationship over the coming weeks, that I needed to have that sort of mindset with regard to my own decisions about, how things went. I knew that I needed to have in the back of my mind that there was some sort of desire to move things forward.
I love everything you said there. And I think it really highlights why it's important to have some of these conversations early, because the longer it goes on, the more attached you get to a guy, the less willing you might be to walk away. And that's going to come out in your energy and in your vibe. Now, we realize that a lot of people watching this video or listening to this podcast might be way past that point. They might have been dating a man for several months or years, and they want to know how to bring this up. So we'll talk about that in a second. But before we do that, I really like what you said, if not now, why? I've actually never heard anyone say that before. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that when I was saying, if not now, why, it's not that that was meant to be a casual remark. It's that it really is focusing on the why being, is this the right person or not? And I think that, like I was stating previously, I think a lot of men will make a lot of excuses, even ones that they maybe themselves are convinced of, that inhibit them from being ready for a relationship at the current time. But the time is not really the issue. It's the person that is the issue, I think. And you could argue that the person is not the right person at this time, but could be the right person at another time or something, but that's really all irrelevant. The point is that they're not ready for a relationship with this person now. And so for me, that question was to bring to light, or to try to bring to the forefront of my mind, if not now, why? What about this relationship? What about us wasn't right? What would not allow me to want to progress this into a long-term, committed relationship?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned when we were talking about this before that question in your mind put you on the path to start thinking about this more in terms of, could this really be something serious or not, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
So what advice would you give to a woman who's maybe been dating a guy for a while and she hasn't brought this up yet? Maybe she feels a little anxious about that. She might get the sense that they're not on the same page. I'd love to hear all your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think for anyone in that situation, the first question to answer is, why has this not come up before? If you're in a relationship that's been going on for, say, a couple of years or longer, for example, and you do want a long-term committed relationship, maybe marriage, why has that not come up at this point? And I suspect that often the answer is that you might be afraid that the guy is not on the same page and that, that might push him away or something. But if that's the case, then really the only thing to determine is, are you okay with this relationship continuing as it is indefinitely? Is that okay? Or if not, then there's no reason for you to not bring it up now, because first of all, there's nothing at this point in the relationship that is going to change between now and some time in the future in his mind. He's either ready to start investing in a long-term relationship or he's not. At this point, if multiple years, for example, have gone by, another 6 months or year or something is not going to do anything in terms of his readiness for the relationship or not. So there's no reason to wait. And the longer that you would wait, the more difficult it becomes to have that conversation, because I like the way that you had said at one point that it becomes difficult to change the momentum of the relationship. The longer something has gone on in a certain mode where you've maybe just been dating casually for many months or possibly years, it becomes a lot more difficult to shift the energy into some other path. It's that momentum is sort of established and will just continue on in that mode. So in this circumstance, how would you advise a woman to bring this up with a man?
Yeah, great question. Again, I think the energy of where you're coming from is what's most important. So if you want to go back and review those 5 key points we shared at the beginning of this video, I think that would be really helpful. And then from that point, just getting the conversation started. You could say something like, I feel a little awkward or anxious bringing this up. I know this is something we haven't really talked about before, but something you might want to know about me is that what I'm actually looking for ultimately is a real committed relationship where I'm building a life with someone, or I would love to get married and settle down and potentially start a family one day. And it would feel good to know whether or not we're on the same page before continuing to date or before moving forward. Every situation is so unique. You're going to have to plug in what feels authentic and true to you here, but just sharing how you feel if you're having a hard time getting it started, and then just simply stating what would be important to you. Then, of course, like we said before, you could talk about what you don't want. You could say something like, what I don't want is for another year or two to go by and have no idea what you're ultimately looking for, not know whether or not we're on the same page. What do you think about that? And come from a place of curiosity where you're bringing this up because you want to know what's important to him. So how did that sound? I just came up with that off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think, like you said, the key points here are, if your request is reasonable, then the energy with which you're coming to the conversation is extremely important. And if you have both of those two elements, then it really doesn't matter at what time you talk to them. The approach is still fundamentally the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wasn't planning on asking you this for this episode, but I think a lot of women would benefit from hearing, how long do you think it takes a man to know whether or not he's interested to pursue her for something serious? I know I hear from so many women who say things like, I've been talking to this guy for 3 or 4 months, or I've been dating this guy for several years. And what are your thoughts on that? Does it take a man a really long time to know whether or not he's interested in that?
No, I mean, I think given a relationship where the two of you have had a chance to actually get to know each other, you've met in person and you've had a chance to have some conversations and maybe have a few dates, I think men will realize whether or not they're interested in pursuing something very quickly. Usually they know within the first few minutes of a date whether or not there's, in their mind, whether or not there is a second date or not. And beyond that, it really only usually will take a matter of weeks to figure out whether or not it's something pursuing long term. So the bottom line is, it doesn't take a man months and months and months or years to figure that out. And I think that your point about the momentum of a relationship is important in that regard too, because the longer that it's allowed to just go on and be undefined, or that there is no expectation in his mind, the more it will tend to settle into that mode. And so he will figure it out very quickly, but given a chance, there are some guys who will just continue in the mode of comfort that they're currently in the relationship, given no reason to pursue anything deeper.
Right. If she's not willing to walk away, if he's gotten the sense that she'll kind of take him however she can get him, there's no reason for him to step up and make a commitment if he's comfortable there. Right. So I think that's really important. We're not saying that a man is going to know whether or not you're the one within a month or two, but he should know whether or not he's interested in pursuing you for something serious and seeing where things would go, right?
Right, exactly.
And I actually wasn't planning on asking you this either, but I think it might be helpful for people to hear the answer to this. Don't feel like you have to answer if you don't want to, but do you wish that you had more time to figure it out with me? Do you wish that maybe we could have dated for a few years and then moved in together and then gotten married several years later? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I mean, and honestly, the honest answer to that is no. And I think we've talked about before, do we wish that we had met early in our life or something like that? And then if that were the case, would we have dated for a longer period of time? Maybe. I mean, if we had met 10 years earlier than we did, would circumstances have been different? Would we have dated for a longer period of time than we did? Possibly, but it's really not worth speculating about. Given the circumstances of our lives at the time when we did meet, I knew that I was ready to commit to a long-term relationship with you, and when we decided that we were ready for marriage, I think we were ready for that at that time as well. So nothing about more time would have changed anything in my mind.
I love how you put that. So we hope this was helpful for everyone watching or listening. Make sure you're following my podcast, Master Your Magnetism. That's available on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else where you can listen to podcasts. That's where I'm spending most of my time these days and where you can find my newest and, in my opinion, my best, most in-depth content. You can also get my free gift, 3 Keys to Attract the Man You Want, report and audio training. That's totally free on my website, HelenaHartCoaching.com. I'll include a link to that in the description or episode details. Thank you so much again for coming on. This was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.